I get to introduce Letitia. She's a good friend. Having been in Athens for kind of about 3 years, it's always great to find other female coaches who are looking to, further that movement. Without further ado, to give kind of a little bit of a background. So Letitia, she's currently a doctoral candidate. I believe she's in her final year, getting close to the finish line, and is conducting research on women in coaching, specifically with sport leadership. She's also an assistant coordinator for the Ohio University online Masters in Soccer Coaching Education, which is great. And in that role, she continues to provide coaching development support for the United Soccer's Coaches Advocacy coaching group. She's coached at international, professional, university and secondary school athletes, and kind of within the realm of strength and conditioning, football, and then specifically sport performance lifestyle. And currently she's providing coaching support for the Ohio University field hockey varsity team and is empowering athlete-centered sports science support. And then finally, she's recently included in the Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Committee for Ohio University Intercollegiate Athletics and Coaches. So Letitia pots and is making waves in a lot of different ways. So we're happy to have you, Letitia, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I see that my slides are just coming up. So hello and welcome, everyone. I'm so excited today to share with you kind of my experiences applying positive pedagogy and strength and conditioning in women's soccer, and specifically the cases that I'm talking about happened in 2015 to the season 2016, in a time before the global pandemic wasn't upon us, and I forgot what those times were like. So just as we're getting kind of set up technically here, just a bit about myself so you can kind of know who I am. Really, my journey with strength and conditioning started in my undergraduate degree. So I did a 3 years undergraduate degree in the UK in sport and exercise science with a focus on coaching, performance and strength and conditioning. And then followed on with my master's degree, which was in sport and exercise science, and with, again, a real focus on strength and conditioning. And my alma mater was really great at providing amazing internship opportunities with strength conditioning, working with various kind of Olympic athletes and professional teams. So I really kind of started to hone my understanding in strength and conditioning with some of the UK's best sports scientists and also strength and conditioning. And then kind of following on what really kind of ignited my passion and kind of real drove S&C into my professional heart was that I had, as an athlete, I suffered 3 major injuries. I tore both my anterior cruciate ligaments whilst I was a professional soccer player, and also I re-ruptured my construction of that anterior cruciate ligament operation as well. So I really had seen the experience of injuries and the need to have that physical preparation and the importance of it that I didn't necessarily have prior to getting injured. Also, really significantly, as a female athlete going through professional sport, especially in the UK and especially in soccer, I really got to see that kind of disproportionate level of S&C support that was given to female sport. But also on top of that, going through my undergrad and postgrad, I really got to see the real disproportionate level of research being provided into female sport. So I really kind of wanted to be that pioneer for women's strength and conditioning in female sport, but also very specifically to the sport that's close to my heart, and that's soccer. So quick fun fact before I get started, I'm actually giving you 2 for the price of 1 here. So the team that you now see on the slide, thank you for the slides coming up. This is where this kind of presentation is based on. So this team here was actually the first ever team I got to work with in terms of finally gaining some major success. This team was actually the first ever team to be promoted into the Women's Super League in the UK. So this is a kind of top tier in women's soccer back in home in the UK. The second fact I'm going to give you, actually, I'm just going to give you the fact and I'll let you research it when I'm back at home. So Sheffield FC is the world's first ever football club. And I'll just leave that with you and I'll let you research that when you get time to go and have a little quick bathroom break, or perhaps as I'm speaking now. So we're going to shift from this kind of introduction. We're going to move into the next slide on the global pandemic. So I would really be remiss in not kind of considering the global pandemic in the consideration of delivering strength and conditioning protocols and kind of sessions, and not really considering how the pandemic is actually impacting those currently. So obviously when I wrote this chapter for this book and when I worked for this team, as I mentioned at the start, the global pandemic really wasn't upon us. So when we think about all of the science that's out there, all of the support, all of the research, it really doesn't really touch on what would you do with a team when you face a global pandemic? How do you deliver S&C when you have to be physically distanced? How do you deliver S&C when you have to have your players wear masks? How do you deliver S&C when your S&C coaches can't necessarily be there to spot you whilst you're lifting heavy weights, so to speak? So I thought I want to touch on it at this point and kind of maybe mention some of the barriers we're all facing currently. I know working with the field hockey team here in Ohio University, we're facing some major barriers in trying to deliver really positive pedagogical strength and conditioning. So some of those might be currently truncated seasons. Seasons have been really cut short, and seasons have also been slammed in terms of games back to back. I know the field hockey team this weekend have to play 2 games back to back. I know other teams are also doing that. So you're basically spending your entire season in a very short space of time, competing 120 minutes each week. So that's a lot of load on a female's body and any body at any stretch. You have minimal contact. You've got tactical and technical staff who are desperate to have access to the team. They don't want to be wasting their time with strength and conditioning time, so to speak. You've got the board of directors, you've got administration staff putting extra parameters on you, you've got medical staff adding extra parameters on you, you've got needs of testing, you've got contact tracing, you've got perhaps international student athletes coming over to your countries and perhaps having to spend their time in quarantine. You have limited contact, all of these things layering on an already very challenging season. So I think as I move into the main part of the presentation, I want us all to kind of think about, as a coaching community, how we address some of the stuff I'm going to talk about now and other stuff throughout this day in terms of how do we approach our current coaching practices with a positive pedagogical approach in factoring in the constraints that the global pandemic has put upon us. So getting into the crux of this kind of presentation now. So what really led me to the point of kind of being able to be successfully implementing positive pedagogies really began at this kind of turning point in my S&C career, right? So I really learned the difference in this point between measurable and meaningful approaches to sports science. So, and what I learned in my undergraduate and my postgraduate and all the different internships that I did, I really thought I knew all the science, and I was trying to cram pack all the science into my internship programs. I was saying, hey, I've done all this research, I've done all this, and we can do this. And often what my mentors would say to me is that this is great, fantastic, but it's not realistic. We can't collect this much data, it doesn't mean anything, it's not going to add any impact. So really, as I've put here on the slide, understanding the science is a huge hurdle. I'm not underestimating that. I had some very arduous years in my undergraduate and postgraduate life. But I think understanding the science is really just that first hurdle. The second hurdle is really then gathering the science and then implementing it to the realities of what you are facing as a coach with whatever your team might be, or whichever your athletes might be, the circumstances they are in. So it's really just trying to understand, how do we apply this science to the current challenges that we're facing? So what you'll see come up on the slide now, so some really key scholars that I had the pleasure of interacting with, they talk often a lot about focusing on what's known as the optimal performance markers. And this was provided by Dr. Paul Bryce, who was actually the head of performance for the Team GB Olympic, all of the Team GB Olympic athletes during Rio 2016. And a common approach that's done even at the elite level is focusing on what they can really truly impact. So Dr. Bryce gave many different examples of very, very successful elite athletes who are in the pinnacle of their careers. And he would often say, we would only collect data that would really then focus on the areas that we can maximize performance. So he gave several examples of, we wouldn't focus on the weaker areas. We would focus, okay, what are the good What are you really good at as an athlete? Okay, we're going to focus on these because we think these are going to be enhance your performance significantly much more than just trying to focus on everything in a kind of poor approach manner. So really just focusing on those areas that can impact performance the most. So in the role that I was working with Sheffield FC, we were looking at what would impact performance the most. Now we had two major goals to achieve. That was to win our league and then also to win our playoff to be promoted to the Women's Super League professional soccer. And they are two huge goals. So we really had to think about what would maximize our performance. And we literally spent most of our time collectively as a coaching staff going through previous results, kind of anecdotal coaching, feedback, various parts and pieces of data that we had in terms of injuries. And basically we narrowed it down to two major things that we discovered. First thing was injury prevention. We were noticing that a lot of our players were getting injured. The second thing was the leading coaching staff, the management of the team, they really wanted to focus on this tactical approach that required our players to sprint and move forward with the ball very fast and without the ball. And also when we lost possession in soccer, retrieving the ball very fast on the way back. So essentially I said, well, this is going to require the team to be very good at sprint repeatability. So we literally had those two objectives: injury prevention in S&C and sprint repeatability. And by highlighting those collectively as a coaching staff and tying them and connecting them with the tactical and technical elements, we were able to really just embed S&C within the soccer session practices without kind of creating a disfunct. That final piece on the optimal performance markers you'll see here is unity. Now we focused on unity in terms of collectively as coaching staff identifying what we wanted to do collectively as a coaching staff and have a very holistic approach that we were all on board with, and that we all fully understood our roles in that approach and how we would adapt and embed these elements. So as we move on to the next slide, doing all of this is really in the aim to find this sweet spot balance. So you often hear this, you might hear this phrase often in sports science. Dr. Paul Bryce obviously spoke a lot about it with Team GB, and it was really finding that sweet spot balance. So it's recognizing the realities, even at the elite level. Dr. Paul Bryce said, even with the Olympic athletes, there was never enough time to focus on all these elements individually, even in a 4-year Olympics. So when we go back to the constraints of the pandemic, we realize even in truncated seasons, when you're in a pandemic, perhaps even when there's competitive seasons that are elongated, when you're playing double headers at the weekend, there really isn't much preparation to consider everything. So really it's finding that sweet spot balance. So for Sheffield FC and the team that I was working with back in the UK, we really just noticed on finding that sweet spot balance was identifying we could embed kind of the injury prevention stuff within their soccer practices. So the coaching staff would often set out their tactical and technical elements, and I would overlay some of the S&C principles within those sessions. So if it was a tactical session, I would work with the tactical coaches to say, hey, here's how we can embed some of that sprint repeatability stuff so that it's specific to soccer. So they're still getting that load and they're still kind of understanding that they need to be adopting those kind of running metrics. But also then they cultivate meaning because it's being done and it feels like it's being done in a way that they know it then translates so perfectly to the game. In terms of injury prevention, we were focusing on effective warm-ups, so that stuff that was based on previous research from FIFA 11+. So all these things were then just nicely embedded and easily laid out in those sessions, and very much holistically done across all coaching staff. So this the final phase that you'll see here, we'll just move on to this next slide now. So this is the final phase that I think is the most fun. And I often look at it almost like flat pack furniture. So if any of you have ever bought furniture and it comes in all these parts and pieces, and essentially all those things I just mentioned, the coaching staff, we came up with all these approaches, we came up with all these goals, but essentially the most important and the fun part was then just providing that ownership to the team itself. So we gave them all the parts and pieces that we decided in terms of prior to pre-season, And then we really focused our efforts in pre-season and given them all these parts and pieces and asking them to put this all together that they see best fit, that fits their team. So our efforts in pre-season, you'll see there on the right-hand side in the column, this is really where the players took ownership over the kind of approaches we provided. And again, it was really just us giving them the parts and pieces, and it was completely player-led. We kind of came up with the idea and they just really molded it and cultivated it to what they believed best suited their needs. They changed some of the lingo. They added two really interesting goals that really fitted the culture of the team. And so they were really kind of deriving this meaningfulness surrounding S&C, and it became such a deeply impacted aspect of their sport-specific and kind of soccer-specific sessions. And then essentially they were able to just easily connect the purpose now of S&C within their soccer because it was so easily embedded within their sessions and within their practice. And because as a coaching staff, they could see that we were all working together and S&C was no longer in silo and done separately away from the field. And then finally, this is just a summary of everything that we've kind of gone through today. On the next slide, if you can just shift on. So really the kind of key things that I wanted to kind of get across here, that essentially even working in a pandemic, everything that I discussed could easily be translated. We spent most of our pre-season efforts really just working with a team in a workshop kind of classroom setting. This can easily be translated into a virtual setting. We have to consider the realities that we are in on a regular basis as coaches and not trying to assume the science fits perfectly just because the science has been produced and advocated for. And I guess kind of finding that sweet spot is always going to be the longest challenge. Like I said, myself and the fellow coaches, it took us 3 weeks to really go through everything and truly identify that sweet spot balance and really just kind of hone in on very small but very specific and very performance impacting approaches to strength and conditioning for women's soccer. So I will wrap up there because I want to give everyone time to ask some questions or any kind of thoughts or concerns that you may have, and I'm happy to indulge.
I don't see any new questions, but I have a question. So when you kind of presented these positive pedagogy examples, and you said it took about 3 weeks to go through, did you ever reassess or continue to talk with them about that? Or how did you just observe, or did you end up circling back to remind them that this is something that we needed to do? How did the process of actually, the implementation and then to the actual doing, how did it go?
So that's a really good question. I'm so glad you asked it. So essentially, we had this vision and we presented it to the players in like a workshop fashion. And actually, they initially, they all started laughing initially because they're a very mature team, but they're a team that also pride themselves on being very physically in high aptitude. They were a very physically fit team. And so I think they were laughing almost at the first, kind of thinking, why do we need this? And then as we kind of asked them those questions back, we said, well, why do you think you need this? And actually, it was really interesting, as I mentioned in the book chapter, the 2 goals that the team actually came up with. The first one was to be the beastiest team in the league, and the second one was to be able to run for as long as I can live because I'm starting to feel like I'm dying. And these were generally the goals, and they wrote these goals down. Now, we know that they are far from what we know as SMART goals or any kind of understandable empirical ways of acknowledging goals, but they were the ways that the players were translating it into their lingo and kind of taking ownership and really cultivating their own culture. So even though we had in our heads, yes, these goals aren't perhaps how we'd like you to phrase them, but we knew that that was their only way of cultivating meaning. And actually, when we think about the 2 goals that they set, to be the beastiest team, yes, we wanted them to basically remain injury-free. And the second one, really, to be able to long for as long as their day can live. That tied in nicely with the kind of sprint repeatability aspect. So I think the implementation part was just kind of almost being comfortable as a coach to kind of step back and say, okay, they're kind of adapting their culture around our approaches, and that's great. And that's as long as we're eventually achieving what we're set out to achieve. I think it's being comfortable knowing that the players can take ownership of that. So I'm glad you asked that question. I think I kind of answered it in a way.
That was great. We have one more question, if you can wrap it up real fast, but I want to get to this because this was someone from watching this. So Kyle said, S&C to me seems like it's one of the most time-constrained areas in coaching in terms of each session. How does this impact on what a positive pedagogy approach looks like session by session? And do you find an empowerment and question-based approach to like that it would take too long?
That is such an amazing question. I wish we had an hour to go through this. I will try and answer this as quick as possible. So Kyle, I think the first part of that question is such an important part of what I was trying to get across in the presentation. So really, because we acknowledged that we were so temporally in time, we had so many time constraints in our own session with Sheffield FC, we were only able to practice twice a week, which is not a lot for a semi-professional team. We only had an hour and a half, so an hour and 30 minutes on the field, and we only were given 20 minutes in the strength and conditioning suite prior to practice. So what we decided collectively as a team was that, okay, we have a limited amount of time in the strength and conditioning suite. What we would do is find a way to see if we can embed those practices in our session itself. So we added that 20 minutes onto the field session. And there were certain things that we were doing because we had identified these two goals of injury prevention and sprint repeatability. There were things that we could do with injury prevention that didn't necessarily need to be done in the strength and conditioning suite. We knew we were so temporally constrained, it wouldn't make any sense periodically to try and plan a very perfectly scientific strength and conditioning session in a 6-week perfect block because we simply didn't have that time. We had a 2-week pre-season, and then we only had 2 sessions per week, and then the season was so elongated that to add that load onto the players would just be so unrealistic. So we just embedded those elements within the soccer session. So that's the easiest way to do it, is find ways to embed S&C within your practice as best as possible, with obviously an understanding that it's going to have an impact from a performance perspective. And that's not to discredit or discount doing S&C in a strength and conditioning suite, but we had to be very mindful of time, and we had to be mindful of the load that we were putting on the players. So going back to my current role in field hockey, just quickly, we can't have our players in the strength and conditioning suite simply because they're playing 2 games on the weekend. They need at least 2 or 3 days to recover. Then we're back on the road on Thursday. So there's literally no time to be in the strength and conditioning suite, but what we're doing is ensuring that we're providing recovery practices and having strong strength and conditioning warm-up protocols. So Carl, I appreciate that question. I realize I didn't get to the second part of the question because it's a very heavy question, and I try my best to answer as fast as I could in that first part. But very good question.
Okay, you can't see me, but I'm lurking in the background. It's Dr. Harvey. So great job, Letitia. Thanks, Laura, as always. Good job on the moderation. There's another question that's come in the chat, Letitia, so maybe you can just respond, type some things in. So I'm going to segue over, Tristram, if you want to just pop Ashley on, and he's going to introduce Nick, who's our next presenter. Good work, everyone, so far. Lots of information.